Breaking story, the Richard Tuite not guilty verdict, which just came down in the last 20 minutes. Joining us now to weigh in on this is former District Attorney Paul Pfingst, who of course is very familiar with this case, given your background. I got to get just your initial reaction to the not guilty verdict.
I'm not at all surprised. I've been dealing with criminal cases and murder cases for over 30 years. This is the single most unusual criminal case I have ever seen. I have seen thousands, literally thousands of murder cases. This is the most unusual. There were two excellent cases in this case. You could prove theoretically that the boys did it beyond a reasonable doubt, or you could prove that Mr. Tuite did it beyond a reasonable doubt, but we know that both of them couldn't do it. And so it's the darndest case that I have ever seen, and it has been confused since the beginning, and it ended up the way it started. It is just, there's contradictory evidence pointing in two entirely separate directions.
And do you feel that anyone's at fault for that? In other words, is it the way the investigation was handled? Is there a problem with the way evidence was gathered that makes it more confusing, or is it just the nature of the people involved?
There was fault, but I don't think the end result was a result of that fault. For example, Michael Crow's statement was disregarded by me, went back in the day because I think it was coerced. The police leaned on him too hard. On the other hand, the other defendant's statement and Mr. Treadway's statement was not coerced. The other physical evidence at the scene suggested that the kids did it. However, the defendant Tuite had a speck or specks of the deceased blood. But how did he penetrate a home and stab a young woman 12, 13, 14 times without her yelling out? He only had two hands, and an FBI expert said that it required more than one person to commit this killing. So each case, there was evidence on one side and evidence on the other side. And so I wasn't at all surprised by this verdict.
What do you say to the family of Richard Tuite? I mean, he spent about 10 years in prison, convicted originally for the murder. Of course, a federal court ordered a retrial, saying that there was a technical issue. Was it a miscarriage of justice that he was convicted in the first place, and now he's been found not guilty?
No, it is an aberration where people looking at the evidence, reasonable people, can come to different conclusions on the basis of the same evidence. The blood on Mr. Tuite's shirt strongly suggests he killed Stephanie Crow. However, the statements of the other boys and the physical evidence suggest they did. What happened in this case is the end was what it was probably doomed to be from the beginning. Nobody can tell with certainty what happened.
Last year, a judge ruled factual innocence for Michael Crow, that's Stephanie's brother, who you've been talking about, who originally was suspected, and his two friends. They were teenagers at the time. Are you saying then, right now, there's still doubt despite the fact that a court found that they're factually innocent?
What I'm saying is that anybody who is intimately familiar with this evidence, who looks at the evidence, who says that they know what happened and know what happened in the death of Stephanie Crow, is better able to look at evidence than I am. The juries, this has been to multiple juries, police, and everybody who's looked at this case. Sometimes the evidence is so confused that we have to humbly say we can't figure it out. And what a jury said in this case is the evidence here is so confusing that, yes, of course there is doubt, a reasonable doubt. They may want to vote one way or the other way as to whether he did it or didn't do it, but there's certainly a doubt because of that. And I think it's the only verdict this jury could have reached. It is very unsatisfactory. Nobody wants to walk away with nobody being held accountable for the death of this little girl in her bed at night. Nobody wants that. I have two daughters. Okay, nobody wants that. But the evidence here just didn't lend itself to proof beyond a reasonable doubt against them or them.
And we have a few seconds left. That's the question. Is this it then? Does this mean that they're never going to find or hold someone accountable for that murder?
Yes, that's exactly what it means.
Very sad day.
It is a very sad day. On the other hand, convicting an innocent person would also add tragedy to the sadness.
That's right.
So who knows?
Paul Pfingst, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight.
My
and of
pleasure.
course, you can go to 10news.com if you want to get more details, not only on the verdict today, but also to find out the history of this case, which of course began in 1998.